King Charles has honoured his brother Prince Edward in a most royal manner on his birthday. Fittingly, the King's younger brother was in Scotland on the day a new title was bestowed upon him, one that comes with the responsibility of continuing their late father Prince Philip's work with young people.
Prince Edward just pulled off a masterclass in quiet revenge, and nobody saw it coming. For years, King Charles believed he held absolute power over royal titles, properties, and the family's future. He thought he could strip Edward of his home, his dignity, and his wife's most prized possession. But on March 25, 2026, Charles was served a brutal reality check. Edward didn't just fight back, he legally cornered the king, and he used their mother's grave to do it. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Edward waited his entire life for one thing: the Duke of Edinburgh title. It wasn't just a name, it was his father's legacy. Prince Philip held that title for over 70 years. It defined his service and loyalty. Before Queen Elizabeth died, she made a deliberate choice. She watched the family splinter amid scandals and greed. She decided that the one son who kept his head down would receive the ultimate reward. Edward remained steady, avoided the drama, and never brought shame to the crown. So Elizabeth locked it in. The dukedom was his. It was a promise, and in April 2023, King Charles finally handed it over. But that was only half the story. The title held little significance without a base. A duke needs a seat of power. For Edward, that was Bagshot Park. This wasn't just any house. It was a massive 120-room Tudor Gothic mansion sitting on 51 acres within Windsor Great Park. Breathtaking and historic, it was meant to be tied to the Edinburgh title forever. Elizabeth understood the risks. She knew how things could change with a new monarch. She signed a letter of intent directly linking Bagshot Park to the dukedom, and Prince Philip witnessed it, signing as he neared death. He was aware of what was coming. His youngest son would be targeted. Without that estate, Edward would be a duke in name only, holding a title without any real power. Philip and Elizabeth built a fortress of paperwork to protect Edward, understanding that the future was uncertain. However, following the Queen's passing, the atmosphere within the palace shifted immediately. A new regime took over. King Charles had a different vision. He called it modernization and restructuring, but in reality, it meant control. Charles believed he had the absolute right to review everything as king. He envisioned a slimmed-down monarchy and also sought ultimate authority. By 2026, this mindset shifted into a weapon. Audits began, quiet reviews were initiated, and pressure mounted behind closed doors. Bagshot Park became a prime target. Charles wanted it back. It was a $30 million asset sitting in plain sight. If the Crown Estate reclaimed it, they could lease it for significant profit and create a revenue stream. However, Charles underestimated his youngest brother. Edward may not be loud, leak stories to the press, or complain. Instead, he kept meticulous records, every single one. He knew this day would come and had spent decades preparing for the moment the institution would turn against him. When the pressure mounted, Edward didn't panic. He opened his files. He was ready for a fight. But the palace didn't stop at targeting the house. They made it deeply personal. Early in 2026, a palace official arrived at Bagshot Park with a clipboard, claiming it was a routine review, a jewelry audit, and national heritage check. Framed as standard operating procedure, it was in reality a targeted strike sanctioned by Queen Camilla's office. This was not a random check. They sought to question the jewelry that Sophie, the Duchess of Edinburgh, had worn for 25 years. At the center of this audit was one specific piece: the anthem tiara. The anthem tiara wasn't just a trinket pulled from a dusty vault. It held deep sentimental value. Commissioned by Queen Elizabeth herself, it was made specifically for Sophie's wedding in 1999. Crafted from 4 antique honeysuckle pieces from Queen Victoria's private collection. For nearly 2 decades, it was the only tiara Sophie ever wore. This detail is heartbreaking, considering that Sophie was never given access to the grand state tiaras enjoyed by other senior royals. She was kept on the lower rung of the hierarchy. She understood her place and accepted it without complaint. The anthem tiara was her only crown and her singular piece of royal identity. Take that away, and she would be left with nothing. That was the point. Camilla's argument was wrapped in legal language, but the cruelty was obvious. Because the tiara contained stones from Queen Victoria, they argued it was crown property. They claimed it should be locked in the central royal vault and that Sophie would have to seek permission to wear the tiara from her own wedding day. The message was clear: You own nothing. We control you. The logic was incredibly dangerous. If Camilla could reclaim the anthem tiara, she could claim ownership of any private gift Elizabeth gave Sophie during her 70-year reign. It would set a terrifying precedent. But the hypocrisy was stunning. Camilla's own massive jewelry collection came from royal sources. If this rule applied to Sophie, it should apply to Camilla as well. Edward's legal team quickly saw through the trap. However, the public had witnessed this kind of petty cruelty before. It echoed the darkest days of the monarchy. After Princess Diana died, an emerald necklace the Queen Mother had given her was taken back and returned to the royal vault. Shockingly, Camilla had it redesigned and wore it as a brooch, infuriating the public. The memory of that disrespect never faded. Now the same pattern was repeating itself. Camilla was using the institution to strip a beloved woman of her personal history. This wasn't about heritage. It was about dominance. It reminded Sophie who was in charge. But this time they had picked the wrong fight. Edward was determined not to watch his wife be humiliated, refusing to let history repeat itself. Edward hit back with a force that rattled the palace walls. His lawyers didn't just argue, they delivered a bombshell of documentation. The first document instantly shut down the tiara audit, a deed of gift signed by Queen Elizabeth II in 1999, explicitly classified the anthem tiara as a private wedding present. It was not a state loan or a shared asset, nor held in trust. It was Sophie's, completely and permanently. Elizabeth loved and trusted Sophie. She even awarded her the Royal Victorian Order, an honor given personally by the monarch. Elizabeth's actions sent a direct message to the future. Camilla's audit was an attempt to erase that message. But Edward went further. In 1999, he worked with royal jewelers to design a matching black and white pearl necklace and earrings for Sophie. Although the crown funded the materials, Edward personally held the design rights. His lawyers argued that the tiara and the pearls formed a single, unbreakable artistic unit. You could not take the tiara without violating Edward's intellectual property. It was a brilliant legal move, another layer of protection. The fight over Bagshot Park was even more intense. Charles thought he could cancel the lease, believing that modernization gave him an excuse to evict his brother. However, the facts destroyed his narrative. When Bagshot Park was offered to Edward in 1996, it was a ruin, falling apart and neglected. The army chaplain had just moved out, and the building was decaying and worthless. The Crown Estate wanted to convert it into a conference center, so they handed it to Edward on a 50-year lease for £5,000 a year, with one significant condition. He had to repair it immediately. Edward did just that, pouring £1.36 million of his own money into renovations, which ultimately cost nearly £3 million. He carried a heavy financial burden to save a royal asset, and once the repairs were completed, his rent jumped to £90,000 a year. The National Audit Office confirmed that he was paying full market value. In contrast, Prince Andrew lived at Royal Lodge for decades without paying market rates and was protected by the system. One brother adhered to every rule, paid his own way, and saved the monarchy money, while the other lived large on the system. Now Charles was attacking the brother who did everything right. In 2007, Edward paid an additional £5 million to extend his lease to 150 years, securing stability for his family. He possessed the original lease, financial records, and a letter signed by Elizabeth and witnessed by Philip. The legal file was indestructible. Yet despite all this proof, the situation was terrifying. Charles was now king. He controlled the machine and could make life miserable without breaking any laws. Evidence alone was not enough. Edward needed an ally. He needed a wrecking ball. By the afternoon of March 25, 2026, the dispute had escalated. It moved from the legal offices into a private room inside Buckingham Palace. The doors closed and the tension was suffocating. Then Princess Anne walked in. When Anne enters a room, the temperature seems to drop. She does not engage in small talk, and she does not concern herself with feelings. She goes straight for the jugular. To grasp the significance of this moment, it's essential to consider the history between Anne and Sophie. They were not always friends. For years, Anne kept her distance. She is tough and doesn't fake warmth. However, after Prince Philip passed away in 2021, the family fractured. Anne and Sophie stepped up to support the royal family during this challenging time. They saw each other daily, became Queen Elizabeth's emotional support, and formed a quiet, unbreakable bond. By the time of the Queen's funeral, they presented a united front, with Sophie quietly comforting Anne, a genuine moment of trust that evolved into fierce protection. So when Anne walked into that meeting with King Charles, she was not just a sister, she was an enforcer. She was there to defend their late mother's honor. Anne looked Charles in the eye and delivered a devastating blow. She warned him that if he allowed private gifts from their mother to be taken, the monarchy itself would lose its credibility. She said, "If our mother's signature on a deed of gift is not worth the paper it's written on today, then your signature will be worth even less tomorrow." This was a psychological strike against the very foundation of his kingship. A king's power is built on continuity and absolute trust in his signature. Break that trust, and the monarchy crumbles. Charles looked stunned. Anne had already reviewed every document regarding Bagshot Park. She knew that Edward had fulfilled his obligations financially and that the crown had accepted his payments. She told Charles the agreement stood. Nothing remained to debate. She united the house and the tiara into a single conflict. Elizabeth had gifted both, supported them with signed documents, and threatened both. Anne made it clear, take one, and you would break the sacred seal of the previous monarch. But Anne's anger was deeply personal. She understood that Sophie had lost her mother at a young age, with Elizabeth stepping in as a surrogate mother. Anne had lost her father in 2021 and her mother in 2022. She knows the agonizing pain of grief and recognizes that the items left behind are all you have left. She viewed this audit not as a legal matter, but as a cruel theft. Anne had witnessed this cruelty before. She saw the palace slowly destroy Princess Diana through isolation, stripping of titles, and relentless pressure to break her spirit. Anne refused to let Sophie become the next victim. She told Charles directly, if Camilla did not stop this audit immediately, Anne would take the matter public. She threatened a comprehensive audit of Queen Camilla's own household, scrutinizing every expense, staffing decision, jewel, and allocation. Anne was the only royal who could make that threat credible. She is respected, and the public trusts her discipline. If Anne blows the whistle, the public will believe her. Charles was trapped, but Anne was not finished. She raised the issue of Edward's children, noting the toxic push to strip James, Earl of Wessex, and Lady Louise Windsor of their protected royal status too early. They wanted to remove their security. Anne stopped that, asserting that their future belonged to their parents, not to Camilla. Although Anne chose a private life for her own children, she was not forced into it. This situation was different. It was bullying, and the Princess Royal does not tolerate bullies. The room was completely paralyzed. Charles was left staring at a nightmarish scenario. He faced two agonizing options, both catastrophic. He could support Camilla, pursue the eviction, steal the tiara, and watch Princess Anne publicly undermine his credibility. Or he could step back, surrender, and admit he doesn't have absolute power over his own family. There was no clean exit. As Anne walked out, the reality settled in. This was a direct challenge to the crown itself. Charles demanded that his legal team review the Edinburgh dossier, and the results were terrifying. Edward's position was bulletproof. Every document was in order, and no royal decree could break a perfectly executed 150-year lease backed by a mother's ironclad will. Charles had legally lost. For years, he had lived in a bubble of presumed authority, believing he could reshape the family properties at will. He thought the title he granted in 2023 would give him influence over his brother. However, his lawyers informed him in cold, hard writing that he was wrong. What Elizabeth had given Edward was permanent, a legal inheritance, and untouchable. That realization shattered Charles's confidence. The final blow was Prince Philip's signature. It changed everything. Charles knew his mother had protected Edward, but seeing his father's name on that document shifted the narrative completely. Philip spent his final days ensuring that Charles could not undermine his youngest son. It was a message from the grave. Both parents had foreseen this conflict. They knew Charles would try to take everything, and they blocked him. Meanwhile, the tension in the palace reached a boiling point. Queen Camilla refused to back down, demanding conformity. She wanted all private gifts reviewed and sought central control, resenting Edward and Sophie's independence in managing their own estate. Their autonomy was viewed as an insult to the new regime. The palace began to crack under pressure, with staff members choosing sides. A quiet civil war broke out in the corridors. Those who loved Elizabeth and respected Sophie started secretly supporting the Edinburghs. Resentment towards Camilla's office grew toxic, and leaks began to emerge. The tightest ship in the world was suddenly sinking in gossip. The king found himself trapped in a minefield. Outside the palace gates, the optics were disastrous. Britain was grappling with a cost of living crisis, and the public was struggling to heat their homes. If the front pages showed a billionaire king trying to evict his hardworking brother from a home he had restored, the backlash would be catastrophic. The monarchy couldn't survive such greed. Desperate, Charles made an informal move, stepping outside the legal arena. He handwrote a private letter to Edward, requesting a brothers-only meeting. It was a classic royal tactic, to evoke family ties and use guilt to break down defenses. However, Charles underestimated the man Edward had become. Edward responded with a clear refusal. He would not meet with his brother unless his entire legal team were present. That rejection echoed through the palace like a gunshot. Edward was no longer the loyal younger brother. He was a man defending his wife, children, and home. He understood the stakes and refused to give Charles even an inch of vulnerability. The line was drawn in the sand, and Charles was standing on the wrong side. As the clock ran out late in the evening on March 25, 2026, the palace officially surrendered. The surrender was not loud. It came as a cold, clinical piece of paper. A formal note was dispatched from the master of the jewel house to Sophie, Duchess of Edinburgh. The message was incredibly short, devoid of warmth, and offered no apology for the trauma they had caused. There was no explanation given. It simply stated that the anthem tiara would remain under her exclusive, private control. The audit was canceled, and simultaneously, the aggressive review of the Bagshot Park lease was quietly abandoned. The palace's PR machine spun this as a recognition of the Edinburgh family's excellent maintenance of the estate. However, behind closed doors, every staff member knew the truth. The king had blinked. The crown had backed down in defeat. Everything Prince Edward fought for was legally confirmed. The Duke of Edinburgh title, the 51-acre Bagshot Park estate, the anthem tiara, and the pearl set. All of it remained precisely where Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip intended. This victory altered the entire balance of power within the British monarchy forever. What began as a family squabble had become a permanent historical record. That legal surrender will reside in the royal archives for centuries. Future historians will read it and understand exactly what happened. A king attempted to steal from his brother, failed spectacularly, and was forced to confess his defeat in writing. However, this victory came at a devastating and irreversible cost. The relationship between Charles and Edward is dead. There is no brotherly love left. It is now cold, formal, and strictly limited to public duty. When the cameras are flashing, one might see unity. They will appear smiling on balconies and walking side by side at Remembrance Sunday. It will all look perfect, but it is merely an illusion. Inside the family, trust is shattered. Edward knows that he had to use aggressive legal measures to protect his wife from his own brother. That betrayal isn't something you forgive or forget. The royal family is now divided into two distinct, powerful camps. At Buckingham Palace, Charles and Camilla rule their shrinking, highly controlled inner circle. However, away from the center, a silent resistance has formed. Princess Anne, Prince Edward, and Sophie stand united, while Prince William and Catherine offer their support from the shadows. This secondary faction is not trying to overthrow the king. They are holding the line and protecting Queen Elizabeth II's legacy from being erased. This divide will shape the next generation. James, Earl of Wessex, and Lady Louise observed this entire nightmare unfold. They witnessed their father confront the most powerful man in the country without throwing a single tantrum. They saw him use patience, paperwork, and brilliant preparation to force a king to surrender. One day, James will inherit the Duke of Edinburgh title. He will carry the name his grandfather made famous, but he will also bear a heavy wisdom. He will know that the crown that gives can quickly turn around and try to destroy you. This trauma does not foster loyalty to the monarch. It breeds caution and survival. James will never blindly trust the institution. He will trust the law. As for King Charles, he won the throne he waited 70 years to occupy. He possesses the crown, the palaces, and the absolute authority he craved. Yet he has lost something far more valuable: the unwavering loyalty of the one brother who never asked for anything. Edward paid his own way, kept his head down, and served quietly. And Charles tried to crush him anyway. That betrayal is not just a legal loss, it is a moral failure. Long after the files are locked away and the palace grows quiet, this will be the legacy that haunts King Charles forever. This conflict proved one thing: you can wear the crown, but you cannot rewrite history. Prince Edward protected his family, honored his parents, and exposed a shocking weakness at the very top of the monarchy. What are your thoughts on Edward's significant legal victory? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more in-depth explorations of the royal family. Catch you in the next one.